The screaming started before dawn. Not the usual sounds of combat that Captain Ichiro Nakamura had grown accustomed to during 3 years of Pacific warfare, but something different, something primal. His men were running, their faces twisted not in tactical retreat, but in pure, unfiltered terror. Some had thrown away their rifles. Others clawed at their own uniforms as if trying to shed their skin. In the pale morning light of February 19, 1945, Nakamura watched as an entire platoon of hardened Japanese infantry, men who had held positions against conventional assaults for weeks, abandoned their fortified bunkers on Iwo Jima without firing a single shot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What emerged from the volcanic ash and smoke was unlike anything in his military experience. A figure encased in protective gear moved with deliberate, methodical purpose toward the Japanese defensive line. In its hands was a weapon that seemed to reach impossibly far, projecting not bullets or explosives, but something far more terrifying. A stream of liquid fire that arced through the air like a dragon's breath, covering distances that defied everything Nakamura understood about flame-based weapons. The fire didn't flicker and die after a brief burst. It continued and continued. A sustained torrent of flame that seemed to flow endlessly from the American soldier's weapon, painting the landscape in colors that belonged to nightmare rather than battle. 10 seconds. Nakamura would later obsess over this number. 10 full seconds of continuous flame projection. His intelligence briefings had mentioned American flamethrower units, describing them as short-range weapons with brief operational capacity, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds of flame at distances no greater than 20 meters. Useful for clearing confined spaces, but vulnerable in open combat. The weapon he now witnessed operated for 10 seconds straight, reaching targets that his visual estimation placed at 45 to 50 meters away. This was not an incremental improvement over known technology. This was something that fundamentally altered the geometry of infantry combat. The morning had begun with standard defensive preparations. Nakamura's company occupied a section of fortified positions carved into the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima's northern sector, part of an elaborate defensive network that Japanese engineers had spent months constructing. These were not simple trenches, but sophisticated bunkers with reinforced concrete, multiple firing ports, and interconnected tunnels that allowed defenders to relocate without surface exposure. The positions had been designed with specific vulnerabilities in mind: artillery, aerial bombardment, and direct assault by infantry with conventional weapons. What they had not been designed for was a weapon that could project sustained fire into openings from distances that placed the operator beyond effective rifle range. Nakamura had received his commission in 1939, trained in the military traditions that emphasized discipline, tactical doctrine, and understanding of enemy capabilities through careful intelligence analysis. His education included detailed studies of American military equipment, assessments compiled by Imperial General Headquarters based on observations, captured equipment, and technical intelligence. The picture these assessments painted was of an American military with certain material advantages offset by predictable limitations. American flamethrowers, according to the intelligence summaries Nakamura had studied, were cumbersome weapons with severe operational constraints. The technical briefing he had attended in December 1944 specifically addressed flamethrower capabilities. The instructor, a major who had served in the Philippines campaign, had been quite specific. American portable flamethrowers carry approximately 4 gallons of fuel mixture, he had explained to the assembled officers. This provides roughly 8 to 10 seconds of total operation, but doctrine requires the use short bursts of 1 to 2 seconds to maximize effective engagements. Maximum range is approximately 25 meters under ideal conditions, with effective combat range closer to 15 meters. The operator must expose himself considerably to employ the weapon, making flamethrower troops priority targets for any competent defensive force. This assessment had informed Japanese defensive planning throughout the Pacific. Flamethrowers were recognized as threats in close-quarters combat, particularly in cave and bunker-clearing operations, but their limited range meant that well-positioned defenders could engage operators before they could effectively employ their weapons. Machine gun positions were specifically sited to cover approaches at ranges beyond flamethrower capability. Rifle squads received training on identifying and prioritizing flamethrower operators, recognizable by their distinctive equipment silhouettes. The entire defensive philosophy assumed that flamethrower attacks represented a calculated trade where American forces accepted casualties among operators to achieve specific tactical objectives in confined spaces. What Nakamura witnessed on that February morning shattered every element of this understanding. The American flamethrower operator who had triggered the panicked retreat from the forward positions had approached to within 50 meters of the defensive line. Not 15 meters, not 25 meters, 50 meters. From this distance, well beyond what Japanese defenders had been trained to expect, the operator had begun firing. The stream of flame had reached bunker apertures that were supposed to be safe from such weapons. More shocking than the range was the duration. The operator had maintained continuous fire for what Nakamura's trained sense of combat timing registered as approximately 10 seconds. Not a brief burst, not multiple short engagements. A single, sustained projection of flame that had turned defensive positions into furnaces. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized courage in the face of enemy fire, acceptance of death in service to the emperor, and maintenance of positions regardless of danger. These principles had proven effective against conventional weapons. Soldiers could steel themselves against bullets, shells, even the terror of aerial bombardment. But the flamethrower provoked something beyond rational fear. It triggered instinctive, mammalian terror that bypassed training and discipline. Men who would hold positions against machine gun fire abandoned bunkers when flame entered their defensive space. The screaming that at first alerted Nakamura was not tactical communication, but the sound of men experiencing something their minds categorized as unsurvivable. Sergeant Kenji Watanabe, one of Nakamura's most experienced non-commissioned officers, had been in the forward position when the attack began. He reached the command bunker 20 minutes later, his face streaked with ash and his hands trembling despite obvious efforts at control. His report, delivered in fragments between attempts to compose himself, provided the first detailed account of what had occurred. "They came from multiple directions," Watanabe began, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation or screaming or both. "We heard the usual sounds of American infantry advancing. We prepared to engage at standard ranges. Then we saw them. 3 operators, each carrying the flamethrower equipment. They stopped at a distance I estimated as 45 meters, beyond our expectations, beyond what we trained for. I thought perhaps they were confused about their weapons' capabilities, that they would need to advance closer before firing." Watanabe paused, his eyes focused on something beyond the bunker walls. "The first operator opened fire from that distance. The flame reached us. Not just reached us, Captain, it filled the bunker entrance. The heat was immediate, intense. But worse than the heat was the duration. He kept firing, the flame kept coming. 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds. It seemed impossible that any weapon could sustain such output. One of my men was directly in the flame path. He died immediately. Others retreated into the tunnel system, but the flame followed. It curved and flowed like liquid, seeking every opening." The sergeant's hands clenched and unclenched as he continued. "I ordered return fire, but the range was difficult for rifles, and the operators wore protective equipment that seemed to deflect at least some shots. While we engaged the first operator, the second began firing at a different bunker entrance. Then the third. They worked with coordination, each covering a different approach. Every burst lasted those same impossible 10 seconds. When they finally stopped, it was not because their fuel was exhausted."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"They simply moved to new positions and began again. Nakamura listened with the professional detachment expected of an officer, but his mind raced with implications. If Watanabe's observations were accurate, and he had no reason to doubt a veteran sergeant's combat reporting, then the American flamethrowers represented a capability far exceeding intelligence estimates. This was not a matter of individual weapon performance variation. This was a systematic difference, suggesting either a new weapon system entirely or a fundamental error in understanding existing American capabilities. The immediate tactical problem was clear. Japanese defensive positions throughout this sector had been designed with flamethrower countermeasures based on assumed 20-meter maximum range. Firing ports, machine gun positions, and kill zones were all calculated on this parameter. If American flamethrowers could effectively engage from 50 meters with sustained fire duration, then every defensive position was vulnerable in ways that current tactics could not address. Defenders who had felt relatively safe behind reinforced positions now faced a weapon that could reach them from distances where their return fire was less effective. Nakamura spent the next hour conducting interviews with other survivors from the forward positions. The accounts were consistent. Multiple operators, coordinated employment, ranges of 45 to 50 meters, and sustained fire duration of 8 to 10 seconds per burst. Several men mentioned that operators seemed to fire multiple bursts from the same fuel load, suggesting either larger fuel capacity than intelligence estimates or more efficient fuel consumption. One private, normally reliable and not prone to exaggeration, insisted that he had counted 4 separate 10-second bursts from a single operator before the American had withdrawn to presumably refuel or reload. If accurate, this suggested a total operational capacity of 40 seconds or more, 4 times the intelligence estimate of total fuel load duration. Nakamura included this detail in his report, but noted it with appropriate skepticism. Combat observations under stress were notoriously unreliable for precise measurements. However, the consistency across multiple witnesses regarding range and burst duration suggested these parameters were accurate, even if total capacity estimates might be inflated by the stress of combat. The report Nakamura prepared for his battalion commander that afternoon represented his best effort to communicate what his unit had experienced while maintaining professional objectivity. He included survivor testimonies, his own observations of the aftermath, and tactical assessments of how these weapons altered the defensive calculus. The report concluded with a request for updated intelligence on American flamethrower capabilities and recommendations for revised defensive tactics pending confirmation of the new threat parameters. Colonel Takeshi Hoshino, the battalion commander, read Nakamura's report with visible skepticism. The colonel was a career officer who had served in China before the Pacific War, a veteran of conventional infantry combat who prided himself on rational assessment of tactical situations. When he finished reading, he set the report aside and studied Nakamura with an expression that mixed concern with doubt. "Captain, I do not question your integrity or the sincerity of your men's accounts," Hoshino began carefully. "However, what you describe contradicts established intelligence on American flamethrower capabilities. These assessments come from Imperial General Headquarters, compiled from observations across multiple campaigns. Are you certain your men accurately estimated the ranges involved? Combat stress can distort perception. What appeared to be 50 meters might have been considerably less." Nakamura had anticipated this reaction. "With respect, Colonel, Sergeant Watanabe is an experienced observer who has conducted range estimation under combat conditions for 3 years. Multiple witnesses from different positions reported consistent ranges. Additionally, we measured the actual distance from the American firing positions to our bunker entrances after the engagement. The measurements confirm approximately 45 to 50 meters. Hoshino frowned, his fingers drumming on the report. "And the sustained fire duration. 10 seconds seems excessive for any portable flamethrower. Perhaps multiple short bursts that survivors perceived as continuous fire due to the chaos of combat?" Again, sir, multiple trained observers reported sustained continuous fire, Nakamura replied. I understand this contradicts our intelligence briefings. That is precisely why I believe this requires immediate attention. Either we are facing a new weapon system or our previous intelligence was fundamentally flawed. In either case, our current defensive tactics are inadequate. The colonel was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications. If what you report is accurate, and I emphasize if, then we face a significant problem. Our defensive network was designed with specific threat parameters in mind. Changing those parameters would require redesigning defensive positions we have spent months constructing. Nakamura nodded. I understand, sir.
However, the alternative is maintaining defenses that may be ineffective against the actual capabilities we face. I would recommend we treat this as confirmed until proven otherwise and adjust our tactics accordingly. What Nakamura could not know as he made this recommendation was that similar reports were arriving at headquarters positions across Iwo Jima. Other units had encountered the same unexpectedly capable American flamethrowers. Other officers were filing reports that contradicted established intelligence. And in command bunkers throughout the island, senior officers were beginning to confront an uncomfortable reality. The Americans had brought a weapon to Iwo Jima that Japanese forces were unprepared to counter effectively. Lieutenant Colonel Hideo Tamura, who served as operations officer for the island's garrison, collected these reports as they arrived at the command center. By the evening of February 19th, he had accounts from 7 different sectors describing essentially identical experiences. American flamethrowers engaging from 40 to 50 meters with sustained fire duration far exceeding previous observations. The consistency across reports from units that had no communication with each other suggested this was not panic or misperception, but accurate reporting of a genuine threat. Tamura was a thoughtful officer who had earned his position through analytical capability rather than seniority alone. As he reviewed the reports, he began compiling notes for a comprehensive assessment. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical concerns. If American forces possessed flamethrower capabilities this advanced, what did that suggest about other weapon systems? Had Japanese intelligence systematically underestimated American technical capabilities? Or was this a recent development, new equipment deployed specifically for the Iwo Jima operation? The questions multiplied as Tamura considered the broader picture. American industrial capacity was known to be substantial, but Japanese planning had assumed this advantage was primarily quantitative rather than qualitative. America could produce more weapons, but not necessarily better weapons. The flamethrowers now being reported suggested a different reality. These were not simply more numerous versions of existing weapons. They represented genuine technical advancement, improvements in range and operational duration that reflected sophisticated engineering and manufacturing capability. Tamura's preliminary analysis, completed late that night, identified several critical points. First, the consistency of reports across multiple units indicated these were standard-issue American flamethrowers, not experimental or specialized equipment. Second, the performance characteristics suggested either significantly larger fuel capacity, more efficient fuel consumption, or both. Third, the extended range implied improved projection mechanisms, possibly higher pressure systems or refined fuel formulations. Fourth, the coordination and tactical employment indicated these weapons were integrated into standard American infantry doctrine, not treated as specialized equipment for limited applications. The final point in Tamura's analysis carried the most disturbing implications. If American forces could achieve this level of technical sophistication with flamethrowers, a relatively simple weapon system, compared to aircraft or naval vessels, what might they have accomplished with more complex equipment? Were Japanese intelligence assessments of American tanks, artillery, aircraft, and naval capabilities equally flawed? Had the entire foundation of Japanese strategic planning been built on systematic underestimation of enemy technical capabilities? These questions would occupy Japanese military analysts throughout the Iwo Jima campaign and beyond. But for Captain Nakamura, watching the sunrise on February 20th from his command bunker, the immediate concern was simpler and more urgent. Somewhere out in the volcanic landscape, American infantry were preparing for another day of combat. And they were bringing weapons that his men feared more than any other implement of war. Weapons that could reach into spaces that were supposed to be safe. Weapons that burned with a duration and intensity that seemed to violate every principle of engineering limitation that Japanese intelligence had assumed constrained American equipment. The screaming would start again soon. Nakamura was certain of that. And this time, he had no confidence that discipline and training would be sufficient to keep his men in position when the flames came seeking them from impossible distances. The systematic unraveling of Japanese assumptions about American flamethrower capabilities began not with official intelligence updates, but through the accumulated weight of frontline experience. In the days following Captain Nakamura's initial encounter, reports flooded into command centers across Iwo Jima with disturbing consistency. Each account described the same impossible performance characteristics, the same extended ranges, the same sustained operational duration that defied every technical parameter in Japanese military handbooks. Major Ryuichi Kobayashi, who commanded a reinforced company defending positions near the island's central sector, experienced his own revelation on February 22nd. His defensive network included what he considered optimal anti-flamethrower countermeasures based on doctrine learned at the Imperial War College. Machine gun positions were sighted to cover approaches at 30-meter ranges, providing overlapping fields of fire that would theoretically catch flamethrower operators before they could close to effective employment distance. Rifle squads had standing orders to identify and engage flamethrower troops as priority targets, recognizable by their bulky fuel tanks and distinctive weapon profiles. The American assault that morning rendered these preparations meaningless. Kobayashi watched through his observation port as American infantry advanced in a coordinated formation that placed flamethrower operators behind suppressing fire from conventional infantry. When the operators reached what Kobayashi estimated as 45 meters from his forward positions, they simply stopped, took firing stances, and began engaging his bunkers. The streams of fire arced across the distance with liquid grace, entering firing ports and ventilation openings that were supposed to be beyond flamethrower reach. What struck Kobayashi most forcefully was not the initial shock of the engagement, but what happened afterward. The first operator fired for approximately 9 seconds, then ceased fire and calmly moved to a new position. The second operator took over, engaging a different bunker with another sustained burst. The third did the same. This was not desperate, improvised combat, but choreographed tactical employment. The Americans were using these flamethrowers not as weapons of last resort for close-quarters emergencies, but as integral components of their combined arms approach, coordinating flame projection with rifle fire, machine guns, and explosive charges with practiced efficiency. Kobayashi's after-action report that evening included technical observations that would prove crucial to understanding what Japanese forces actually faced. "The flame composition appears different from previous encounters," he wrote. "The fire burns with greater intensity and adheres to surfaces in a manner suggesting a refined fuel mixture. When flame enters a confined space, it does not simply illuminate and fade, but continues burning, consuming available oxygen and creating sustained heat that makes positions untenable even after the initial flame burst ceases." He continued with details that revealed careful observation under combat stress. "The operators carry equipment that appears more compact than previous intelligence photographs suggested. The fuel tanks, while still prominent, seem proportionally smaller relative to the weapon's performance. This suggests either more efficient fuel consumption, higher energy density in the fuel mixture itself, or both. Additionally, the projection mechanism operates with minimal visible flash or smoke from the ignition system, indicating refined engineering that maximizes fuel efficiency while minimizing operator signature." These technical observations were complemented by accounts from the few prisoners Japanese forces managed to capture during counterattacks. A wounded American Marine, taken prisoner after a night infiltration attempt failed, provided information that Japanese interrogators initially dismissed as either disinformation or the confused rambling of a traumatized soldier. The prisoner claimed that the flamethrowers used by Marine Corps assault units could fire for up to 10 seconds per burst and engage targets at ranges exceeding 50 yards. measurements that aligned perfectly with Japanese combat observations but contradicted every intelligence estimate. The prisoner also mentioned something that Japanese interrogators found particularly puzzling. He referred to the flamethrower fuel as napalm, a term unfamiliar to Japanese intelligence analysts. Further questioning revealed this was apparently a specialized fuel mixture designed specifically for military flamethrower applications. The Marine described it as a jellied petroleum product that adhered to surfaces and burned with sustained intensity. This description matched combat observations but suggested a level of specialized development that Japanese planners had not anticipated. Lieutenant Commander Masao Fujita, who served as technical intelligence officer for the Iwo Jima garrison, became increasingly absorbed by the puzzle of American flamethrower capabilities. Fujita had studied chemical engineering before the war and brought technical expertise to his analysis that went beyond conventional military intelligence training. As reports accumulated, he began constructing a comprehensive assessment of what Japanese forces were actually encountering. The key breakthrough in Fujita's analysis came from examining the fuel residue samples collected from sites where American flamethrowers had been employed. The residue displayed characteristics markedly different from standard petroleum-based fuels. It had a gelatinous consistency even after burning, adhered tenaciously to surfaces, and continued smoldering long after the initial flame had passed. Chemical analysis of these samples, conducted in the garrison's limited laboratory facilities, revealed the presence of aluminum soaps mixed with petroleum distillates, creating a substance with properties unlike any military fuel in Japanese inventory. This jellied fuel explained several mystery observations. The extended range resulted from the fuel's consistency, which allowed it to be projected as a cohesive stream, rather than dispersing into droplets that would fall short of the target. The sustained burning duration came from the fuel's adherence to surfaces, which prevented it from simply flowing away and allowed complete combustion. The psychological terror it provoked stemmed partly from this adherence property. Victims could not simply brush off or outrun the flames. Fujita's technical report, completed on February 28, represented the first systematic Japanese analysis of American napalm-based flamethrower technology. The Americans have developed a fuel mixture that fundamentally changes the operational parameters of flamethrower warfare, his report began. This is not an incremental improvement, but a qualitative transformation of the weapon system. Our previous intelligence assessments based on conventional petroleum fuels are obsolete. The report detailed the implications with methodical precision. The jellied fuel allows projection distances of 45 to 50 meters under typical combat conditions, nearly double the effective range of conventional flamethrowers. The fuel's consistency permits sustained continuous fire of 8 to 10 seconds, compared to the 2 to 3 second bursts possible with conventional fuels before dispersion makes fire ineffective. The adherent properties ensure that even brief exposure to the flame stream results in sustained burning, making positions untenable and creating casualties that conventional fuels would not produce. Fujita concluded with observations that extended beyond immediate tactical concerns. The development of this specialized fuel mixture indicates a level of research and industrial application that our intelligence seriously underestimated. This was not battlefield improvisation, but deliberate engineering, requiring extensive testing, refinement of chemical formulations, and manufacturing infrastructure capable of producing specialized military chemicals at scale. If American chemical industry can develop and field such specialized products, we must reassess our understanding of their overall industrial technical capabilities. This reassessment was already underway at higher command levels. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who commanded all Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, had received dozens of reports describing American flamethrower employment. Initially skeptical of accounts that contradicted established intelligence, Kuribayashi eventually accepted that his forces faced weapons considerably more capable than anticipated. His recognition of this reality led to the issuance of revised tactical guidance on March 3rd.
All units will recognize that American flamethrower capabilities exceed previous intelligence parameters, the directive stated. Effective engagement range is now assessed at 50 meters with sustained operational duration of 10 seconds per burst. Defensive positions must be adjusted accordingly. Machine gun emplacements will prioritize flamethrower operators at maximum effective range. Rifle squads will engage flamethrower troops beyond 40 meters whenever possible. All personnel will recognize that current bunker and cave fortifications may not provide adequate protection against these weapons and should maintain awareness of secondary exit routes. The directive represented official acknowledgement that Japanese tactical doctrine had been based on flawed assumptions. However, acknowledgement alone could not resolve the fundamental problem. The defensive network on Iwo Jima had been constructed over months, with firing ports, ventilation systems, and position spacing all calculated based on assumed flamethrower limitations. Retrofitting these positions to account for extended-range flamethrowers would require time, resources, and freedom of movement that Japanese forces no longer possessed. The psychological dimensions of this weapons gap became increasingly apparent as the campaign progressed. Private Takeo Yamashita, an 18-year-old conscript serving in Nakamura's company, kept a diary that survived the battle and provided insight into how ordinary soldiers experienced the flamethrower threat. His entry from March 5th captured the pervasive fear these weapons generated. "We heard them coming before dawn," Yamashita wrote. The usual sounds of American movement, the metallic clinks of equipment, the occasional shouted order in their strange language. But today, there was something else. Someone said they saw flamethrower operators in the assault group. The word spread through our position like poison. Men who would stand firm against rifle fire or even artillery began talking about falling back. Sergeant Watanabe ordered silence, but you could see it in everyone's eyes. The fear. Not the normal combat fear that every soldier learns to manage, but something deeper, something primitive. The entry continued with observations that revealed the weapon's psychological impact. When the flames came, they came from so far away. I thought we were safe. I thought the Americans would have to come much closer. But the fire reached us anyway. It entered through the firing port like a living thing, a serpent of flame that sought us out in the darkness. The heat was instant and overwhelming. Men screamed. Not battle cries or orders, but true screams. The sound of men whose minds have broken. I am ashamed to admit I screamed too. Similar accounts appeared in letters, diaries, and post-battle testimonies from Japanese survivors throughout the Iwo Jima campaign. The consistent theme was not simply fear of injury or death, which all combat troops experienced, but a unique terror provoked by flamethrower attacks that bypassed rational threat assessment and triggered instinctive panic. Senior officers recognized this psychological dimension as potentially more dangerous than the tactical challenges the weapons presented. Colonel Hoshino, who had initially been skeptical of Nakamura's early reports, eventually confronted the psychological crisis directly during a meeting with his company commanders on March 8th. "We must address what is happening to unit cohesion," he told the assembled officers. "I have reports of men abandoning defensive positions before American flamethrowers even fire. The reputation of these weapons is becoming as damaging as the weapons themselves. This cannot continue." Captain Nakamura, present at the meeting, offered his assessment. "With respect, Colonel, the issue is not simply fear, but the rational recognition that our defensive positions offer insufficient protection. When men know that a weapon can reach them from distances where they cannot effectively return fire, when they know that brief exposure results in sustained burning that conventional response cannot address, the instinct for self-preservation overrides training. We cannot shame men into standing against a threat that doctrine has not prepared them to counter." The discussion that followed revealed the depth of the problem Japanese forces faced. Officers shared accounts of units that had held positions against sustained infantry assaults but dissolved when flamethrowers appeared. They described the tactical paralysis that occurred when troops knew flamethrower units were present in attacking American formations. Some units had begun refusing to occupy certain defensive positions, particularly bunkers with limited exits, fearing they would become death traps if flame weapons were employed against them. Lieutenant Colonel Tamura, attending the meeting as a representative from Island Headquarters, provided context that connected the tactical problems to broader strategic realities.
"What we are experiencing with these flamethrowers is part of a pattern we have observed across all categories of American equipment," he explained. "Our intelligence consistently underestimated their technical capabilities. Their tanks are more reliable and more numerous than we anticipated. Their artillery fires at rates we thought impossible. Their close air support responds with speed and precision that our doctrine said was not achievable. Now we learn their flamethrowers exceed every parameter we planned against." Tamura paused, his expression grave. The pattern suggests not isolated intelligence failures, but a systematic misunderstanding of American industrial and technical capabilities. They are not simply producing more weapons, they are producing better weapons, refined through research, testing, and manufacturing quality that our assessments said they were incapable of achieving. Every engagement provides new evidence that we are fighting an enemy we fundamentally misunderstood. This realization was reinforced by intelligence gathered from captured American equipment. When Japanese forces managed to recover an intact flamethrower from a killed American operator, the weapon was immediately transported to Lieutenant Commander Fujita for technical analysis. His examination provided concrete evidence of the sophistication Japanese observers had inferred from combat performance. The weapon designated by Americans as the M22 flamethrower represented advanced engineering in every component. The fuel tanks were constructed from welded steel with precise manufacturing tolerances that minimized weight while maintaining pressure integrity. The projection gun featured a sophisticated valve system that allowed precise control of fuel flow and combustion. The ignition mechanism used a reliable cartridge system rather than the sometimes finicky electrical igniters found on Japanese flamethrowers. Every element of the design reflected not just adequate functionality, but optimization for battlefield reliability. Most revealing was the fuel itself. Analysis of residual napalm in the captured weapon confirmed Fujita's earlier assessments from burn residue samples. The jellied petroleum mixture achieved an ideal balance between viscosity for extended range projection and fluidity for reliable weapon operation. The chemical composition included additives that stabilized the mixture, prevented separation during storage, and ensured consistent burning characteristics across varying temperatures and conditions. This was not merely adequate military fuel, but a carefully engineered product optimized for its specific application. Fujita's technical report on the captured weapon concluded with observations that transcended immediate tactical concerns. This flamethrower represents sophisticated engineering throughout its design and manufacture. The precision of component fitting, the quality of welding, the consistency of fuel mixture all indicate production methods that emphasize reliability and performance. More significantly, the weapons show signs of recent manufacture, suggesting these are not limited prototypes but standard production items made in quantity. He continued with broader implications that echoed themes emerging from multiple intelligence sources. The ability to design, test, refine, and mass-produce such specialized equipment indicates industrial capabilities that our strategic planning underestimated. We assumed American industry was primarily oriented toward quantity production of adequate equipment. This weapon suggests they have achieved both quantity and quality, mass manufacturing weapons that incorporate sophisticated engineering and specialized materials. This assessment aligned with information gleaned from prisoner interrogations. American troops, when questioned about their equipment, displayed casual confidence about the reliability and effectiveness of their weapons. They spoke of flamethrowers as standard infantry support tools rather than specialized equipment for particular situations. Several prisoners mentioned that flamethrower training was integrated into regular infantry instruction, indicating these weapons were not confined to elite units but distributed throughout American forces. One captured Marine sergeant provided particularly revealing information during interrogation on March 12. When asked about flamethrower supply and maintenance, he described a logistics system that ensured continuous equipment availability. "We always had replacement fuel tanks ready," he explained through a translator. "If a flamethrower malfunctioned, we could request a replacement and usually have it within a few hours. The supply guys kept spare parts, extra fuel, backup weapons. We never worried about running out of capability." This casual abundance, the assumption that equipment would be available when needed and that malfunctions could be quickly resolved through replacement rather than field repair, reflected a logistics philosophy fundamentally different from Japanese practice. Japanese forces, operating with limited supplies and constrained production capacity, emphasized conservation, field repair, and making equipment last as long as possible. American forces, backed by vast industrial production, could afford to treat equipment as replaceable, focusing on maintaining operational capability rather than preserving specific items. The contrast extended to tactical employment doctrine. Captured American field manuals, translated by Japanese intelligence officers, revealed an approach to flamethrower warfare that assumed material abundance. The manual specified liberal use of flame weapons against fortified positions, with doctrine suggesting that psychological impact justified significant fuel expenditure even when target destruction might be achieved through other means. Sections on ammunition and fuel planning allocated flamethrower fuel at rates that Japanese planners would consider wasteful, reflecting confidence that resupply would maintain operational stocks regardless of expenditure rates. Major Kobayashi, reviewing these translated manuals, was struck by the philosophical differences they revealed. They use flamethrowers not as weapons of last resort, but as preferred tools for specific tactical situations, he observed during a staff meeting.
Their doctrine assumes unlimited availability. They plan operations on the assumption that they can employ flame weapons freely without concern for conservation. This is not simply having better equipment. This is having so much equipment that tactical planning operates in a completely different conceptual framework. This abundance-based approach to warfare became increasingly evident as the Iwo Jima campaign progressed. American forces employed flamethrowers with what Japanese observers considered shocking profligacy. Bunkers that might have been reduced through conventional explosives or bypassed entirely received flame attacks as a matter of routine. Cave positions were systematically cleared with flame weapons even when less resource-intensive approaches were available. The American tactical philosophy appeared to be that if flame weapons were effective for a given situation, they should be used regardless of whether alternative methods might conserve resources. The cumulative effect of these observations fundamentally altered how Japanese officers understood the enemy they faced. What had begun as tactical surprise about specific weapon performance evolved into strategic recognition of industrial disparity. Captain Nakamura, reflecting in his personal journal on March 15th, captured this transformation in thinking. "We prepared to fight Americans we imagined, not Americans who actually exist," he wrote. "Our intelligence described an enemy whose industrial base produced adequate quantities of conventional equipment. We planned accordingly, assuming that superior Japanese training and tactical skill would offset their material advantages. What we actually face is an enemy whose industrial capacity has produced not just more weapons, but better weapons. Their flamethrowers are not simply more numerous versions of what we possess. They represent genuine technical advancement, the product of research, engineering, and manufacturing sophistication we did not anticipate." Nakamura continued with observations that connected the flamethrower revelation to broader patterns. "Every category of American equipment exceeds our expectations. Their infantry weapons are more reliable. Their vehicles are more numerous and better maintained. Their artillery fires with intensity we thought impossible to sustain. Their close air support arrives with speed we believed was not achievable. And now we learn their flamethrowers operate at ranges and durations that our entire defensive philosophy said were impossible. We are not losing because they fight better. We're losing because they can bring to bear material capabilities that render our tactics inadequate." This recognition spread throughout the Japanese command structure on Iwo Jima as the campaign entered its final weeks. Officers who had been trained to emphasize spiritual strength and tactical discipline over material considerations now confronted the limits of that philosophy. Courage and training remained important, but they could not overcome the fundamental disparity in available combat power. When American forces could employ flame weapons from safe distances with sustained duration, Japanese defenders found themselves in positions where traditional values of holding ground and refusing retreat resulted not in heroic last stands, but in futile deaths. General Kurabayashi, in one of his final communications with Imperial General Headquarters before the island fell, addressed this reality with characteristic bluntness.
Our forces have fought with maximum determination and skill, but we face material superiority that cannot be overcome through spirit alone, he wrote. The Americans possess weapons that operate beyond the parameters our planning assumed. Their flamethrowers reach into positions designed to be safe from such weapons. Their tactical doctrine reflects industrial abundance that allows them to apply overwhelming force as a matter of routine rather than special effort. The general's message concluded with observations that transcended the immediate tactical situation. The lesson of Iwo Jima is not merely that American forces are numerous and well-equipped. It is that their industrial base can produce specialized military equipment with sophisticated performance characteristics at scale. They have translated manufacturing capacity into battlefield capability in ways our planning did not anticipate. Future operations must account for this reality, or will encounter the same disparity between expectation and actuality that has defined this campaign. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.